Welcome back to The Deep Dive. Today we are tackling a really fascinating source you sent over. It's a philosophical piece from a blog titled Confusion of Beginning and End.
Or for our German speakers, Verwechslung von Anfang und Ende.
Right, and what's so interesting is that the text itself is, well, it's a kind of performance.
Yeah.
It opens with this almost satirical ambition.
It's very self-aware. The author basically declares this will be the very special lecture.
Exactly. A text that is totally different from everything that came before and, completely distinct from anything that will come after. It's aiming for this state of pure, self-contained uniqueness.
But that's the trap, isn't it?
It is. The brilliance here is that it immediately folds in on itself. The very moment this lecture tries to draw a strict boundary around itself to say, I am autonomous, it has to, by definition, refer to everything else.
So the pursuit of total independence actually leads to, well, immediate dependence. It's a paradox right from the first sentence.
And that paradox is really the perfect way to get into the rest of the text. You share this because it's such a great shortcut to understanding these deep ideas about, originality, creativity.
For originality, creativity, knowledge transfer, especially now as we try to get technology to simulate all of those things.
Right.
And this isn't just wordplay. It's a critique built on self-reference, and the very real, hard limits of what we can copy or represent. The text is performing a kind of meta-critique.
Using things like classic logic problems.
Exactly, the kinds of things you'd see in discussions about Russell's antinomy, to really show how we misunderstand what a creative process actually is. So our mission for you today is to unpack that central thesis.
The confusion of beginning and end.
The confusion of beginning and end. We want to show you exactly why this philosopher argues that just looking at the output is so misleading and why a perfect copy of a true original is, well, maybe impossible.
Okay, let's get into that core premise, because it gets conceptual pretty fast. The source says the goal of this very special lecture is pure self-contemplation. Nothing else.
An intellectual echo chamber.
Yeah, and if nothing else is supposed to exist, then the contemplation has to contemplate itself while it's in the act of contemplating. It's a completely closed loop, just generating its own reality.
Which, of course, creates a huge problem for anyone on the outside. For us.
For us, the observers. If this system is purely self-referential, if its whole point is just to be for itself, how can we even get access to it? How can we even check that it's happening?
The source is very clear on that point.
It just says, one has no access, period.
And that's the philosophical wall the text deliberately builds. It forces you to think about system closure. I mean, if you look at systems theory, the work on autopoiesis from Maturana and Varela, or how Luhmann later used it, this is the core idea.
A self-producing system.
A system that constantly regenerates the very components that allow it to keep going. And the crucial point there is that a system like that is fundamentally opaque. It's a black box. Its internal workings can't really be verified from the outside because it doesn't need outside validation. Its own existence is its validation.
Its internal logic is its own reality. It's built for itself, by itself.
Exactly.
But then the source gives us this incredible metaphor for this process, for this opaque thing. It describes the system as constantly changing its form. Just like that. It says it's playful.
Yes, the little monster metaphor. It's just a fantastic image.
It really is.
Because despite being this closed internal system, it's not static, it's dynamic, it grows, it changes, according to its own appropriate way. This isn't just data sitting there, it's a living, self-defining process.
And this is where the dilemma for the observer becomes, almost existential, because if we, the audience, try to intervene or even just observe the little monster's internal process too closely.
The source gives a pretty stark warning.
It says the disturbance will probably just end the whole affair. The very thing you were trying to understand is destroyed by your act of looking at it, and you're left no wiser than before.
You destroy it by trying to dissect it. And this is why the lecture's reality lies in its ongoing process, not in any single observable result you can capture. The generating process, the secret life of the little monster.
Has no access at all.
Exactly. And that's where the argument about creativity and copying really lands. If the essence, the generating engine, is fundamentally unavailable to us, then the lecture itself is fundamentally uncopyable.
You can see the form it takes at any one moment. You can reproduce that.
Sure, you can reproduce the form, but you can't capture the engine that lets it generate the next form.
That distinction feels so important. It really challenges this idea that you can just deconstruct a great work of art or a brilliant invention into a series of steps that anyone can follow.
Because if the true original is this self-defining, inaccessible thing, then any copy we make is always going to miss the most important part.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting then. Because this impossibility of copying the origin, that leads us right into the central critique, the title of the piece.
The confusion of beginning and end. This is the heart of it. The text claims that so much of what we do, from, say, writing history to building technology, is based on this one core misunderstanding.
So we need to be really clear on the terms here. The end is what?
The end is the observable form. It's the changing surface, the visible result, the thing that manifests from the process. It's the artifact you can hold.
And the beginning.
The beginning is that internal, ongoing, permanent, self-referential process. It's the inaccessible generative impulse. It's the little monster's internal dynamic logic.
So the mistake, the confusion, is when we look at the constantly changing end, the finished product, and we fool ourselves into thinking that by copying that, we've somehow captured the beginning, the creative spark itself.
Precisely. Let's try an example. Think of a wildly successful startup. The end is the slick user interface, the viral marketing, the perfectly written business plan, all the stuff you can see and copy.
But the beginning was what? The messy, unrepeatable arguments between the founders in a garage. That one moment of weird inspiration.
Exactly. The lived experience that drove their initial messy impulse. So when a competitor comes along and just clones the UI and the marketing deck, the end, they're just left with an empty shell. They've completely missed the unrepeatable generative logic, the beginning.
And the source connects this directly to our attempts to simulate creativity, right?
Right.
With algorithms and AI.
Well, that's a huge critique of that.
Yeah.
The text describes this with some beautiful irony. It says people simulate the changing form in the hope that the algorithm carrying out this simulation will eventually take matters into its own hands and one will no longer have to do anything.
That is a sharp jab at some of the magical thinking around machine creativity. The idea that if you just copy the result enough times, the algorithm will somehow spontaneously gain the self-referential impulse, the beginning all by itself.
It's a critique of what you could call emergence by imitation. The source just flat out rejects the idea that its own essence, its beginning, can be reduced to mathematical and logical expressions.
It says those things, the code, the hardware, the information, are just the end.
They're the container, not the source. The result, not the engine.
But hold on, what about something like open source software? I mean, if I can copy the code, the end, and run it perfectly on my own machine, haven't I actually copied the entire system and its process?
That's a great question, a perfect challenge to this.
Yeah.
And I think the answer is that, in that case, you've copied a deterministic system, a system that follows a set of rules.
Okay.
But the text is talking about creative, self-defining systems. The source itself is claiming its own process isn't just deterministic code. The moment a system achieves this true, opaque self-reference, our little monster, the code you copy is just the current snapshot of a process that has already moved on.
It's like copying a recipe but missing the chef's intuition that makes the dish special.
Exactly. And this confusion isn't new. The analysis points out historical echoes everywhere. Think about teleological errors in history believing events were guided by their outcome. Or in art, Adorno's critique of the culture industry was basically this. They imitate the form of art, but they don't have the authentic inner impulse. They copy the map, but the territory is long gone.
So when you do try to clone this kind of creativity, when you only copy the end, what's the inevitable result?
The text is very stark about it.
You get an empty shell, a simulation without substance, a huge laborious effort that just creates a hollow copy.
And that idea of the empty shell, it connects directly to philosophical concepts like the simulacrum, Jean Baudrillard's idea.
A copy without an original.
A sign that only refers to other signs, totally detached from any real source. The copy becomes hyper-real. It might even look more perfect than the messy original, but it's fundamentally hollow because the beginning is gone.
Can you give us a real-world example of that? Is it like someone who copies a successful influencer's entire style, the photos, the captions, everything, but they just don't have that unique voice that made the original work?
That's a perfect example. They have the perfect shell, but no internal engine. They've captured the end, the aesthetic, but not the beginning, the unique psychological drive that generated it. And the effort to keep that shell going, as the source says, is laborious. It's draining because it has no internal fuel.
And here's the really cynical but probably true observation the text makes. This whole idea, the empty shell, it will find many followers.
It's seductive.
People will be united by this shared belief, which is based on a complete misunderstanding of where things come from.
It really highlights how tempting superficial imitation is.
Mm.
When the real thing is inaccessible, the beautiful copy becomes the thing everyone wants. People flock to the easy, visible answer, even if there's nothing inside.
So how does the text itself respond to this? Does it try to explain itself?
No, and that's what's so fascinating. It does the opposite. It chooses to simply let this lecture develop itself. It refuses to explain or decode its own mechanics for the outside world. It's a kind of farewell to Verstinen, to the whole idea of complete, rational, external understanding.
But it's not a sad surrender, is it? It feels more like a peaceful acceptance. The text advises us to accept that the dynamic form we see, that playful surface, is not a clue that lets you figure out what exactly is going on.
Right. The form is its own reality. It refuses to be reduced to data points or a blueprint, and the conclusion just hammers this home. It ends with the feeling of not at all a pity and a simple good night.
It's a final, definitive closure.
It is. It reinforces that the text, and by extension any truly original thing, is not a means to an end. It is its own autonomous process, and it can't be fully penetrated by us on the outside.
So, after all of that, what does this deep dive really mean for you, the listener, who's navigating this ocean of sources and data every single day?
I think the core takeaway is incredibly powerful.
It seems to be that true creativity or true originality is this internal self-referential process, the beginning, and it fundamentally resists being copied or reduced to its observable output, the end. It's an invitation to stop focusing so much on just replicating the surface and instead to maybe acknowledge what the philosopher calls the Eigenlogik der Dinge.
The inherent logic of things, the unique, often hidden rules by which something generates itself. The whole text really functions as this poetic, philosophical counterargument to any attempt to reduce creativity to just an algorithm.
It encourages a kind of respect for what is unverfügbar.
Unavailable to our analysis, that not everything that's essential can be broken down into neat, copyable units of hardware or software or information.
So that leaves us with a final thought for you to take away.
It forces us to ask a really tough question about the sources we consume. If our sources, a research paper, a novel, an idea, are also constantly changing forms, if they're also these little monsters growing on their own, how certain can we ever be that we're reading the beginning of an idea, the actual generative impulse?
And not just the end result of its own inaccessible, self-referential process.
Exactly. What vital knowledge are we missing when we only look at the surface and we mistake that observable output for the real unobservable generative input?
A compelling question to leave you with. Thank you for diving deep with us. We'll see you next time.